Okay. So they're cutting here or here?
to see the wreckage up close, to see a freight that is nearly the size of the Eiffel Tower, and to see that same freight with the key bridge resting on top of it, to see shipping containers that were ripped in half as if they were paper mache, to know that out there you have to navigate high winds and electric wires. To go out there and to see it up close, you realize just how daunting a task this is. You realize how difficult the work is ahead of us. With a salvage operation this complex, and frankly, with a salvage operation this unprecedented, you need to plan for every single moment, and every time you take action to move a piece of wreckage, you understand that that requires you to reassess the situation.
I'm Rear Admiral Shannon Gilreath, speaking on behalf of the Unified Command. As I mentioned last night, our number one priority of the Unified Command is to reopen the Port of Baltimore. And to do that, we've broken that into 3 phases. Number 1 phase is reopen the shipping channel. Number 2 is remove the ship. And number 3 is to remove the debris from the bridge from the rest of the waterway. We're beginning to make progress on those phases. In the phase 1, we talked about that we need to do the assessments of the bridge, both above the water line and beneath the water. Those assessments continue. As the governor said, we were out there today and we could see the engineers and the divers and the survey boats out there on the water in these difficult wind conditions, doing their job, doing their work to assess that bridge, to figure out how we can cut it up into the pieces we need to be able to lift. And back at the Unified Command, the governor, the commandant, all the elected officials, they could see those engineers working on those very plans. Engineers from the Army Corps of Engineers, Navy Supervisor of Salvage. We had state engineers there. There were some private engineers helping us, and we had some Coast Guard engineers there. And they're all working diligently to figure out that right plan to be able to break that bridge up into the right size pieces that we can lift. And the second part of that is we need to get the heavy lift equipment here. And we've been telling you that those cranes are on their way and that equipment's on that way. And behind us, you can see the first of those things that are arriving. They're arriving and they're going to continue to arrive for the next several days. And we're going to continue that planning so that we will be ready to be able to take advantage of that as soon as possible and do it safely.
Today, workers began the daunting task of cutting the destroyed bridge into pieces, a critical first step in the urgent effort to reopen the city's blocked port.
All right, guys, this is video we got from the Unified Command System over at the Baltimore Bridge collapse site at the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and they've started work. And we can see here, it looks like Don John has their Farrell 256 up, along with that leap year LR 1300. Looks like these are the cranes that they've got going on right now. They're using them to support personnel to get some cutting torches going. They did have a delay yesterday. G-Captain, if you guys haven't checked out G-Captain, they stay on top of a lot of the marine time stuff, but there was a high pressure gas line that was discovered in the area alongside the ship in that collapse zone, and they had to deal with that. Salvage operations were temporarily halted while that happened. This was put out yesterday as well. It looks like they've added the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to the Unified Command. And also a thing of interest to me is they're claiming this is a no-fly zone for drones, yet I was easily able to get my authorization to fly in the area at the site. Of course, I am a 107 pilot, and maybe that's the difference for commercial drones versus recreational drones. I've run into that before, but you see these crews out with the cutting torches, and they're working on the surface parts of the bridge, and it's good to see them get started. You know, going back to that gas leak, a lot of the operation is going to hinge on delays and issues that develop. But the important thing is you've got a group there that can find their way over, around, under, or through an obstacle as quickly as safety will allow. And I think that's evident with the group that they've got there today. And we see the shot from this morning of assets that are there on the site. It is Easter morning, and so it looks like they're getting things going, and I'm sure they're working just as feverishly as they can, despite the holiday, to get this debris moving. But it's going to take some time, and you know that once the divers get in the water, it's really going to get tedious. Those guys have to, first of all, be instructed on where they're going to go. They'll have a briefing. They're going to know exactly what they're doing when they get down there. You got to think that some of this material that's piled up down there, you make one wrong cut and it could be catastrophic to everybody around you. So thoughts and prayers for those folks today as this work continues to get the whole collapse area cleaned up and we can get the city of Baltimore back operational. Hey, that's all we got for today. Thanks for watching. And as always, we're going to ask you, leave us some comments, and hey, you guys be safe out there.
This is Super Yacht News with E. Sisman.
Hi, welcome back to the channel. Okay, so we have access now to a news conference that was given yesterday by the NTSB. And this is something that was clearly used by a reporter who wrote the Bloomberg article that we referenced in last night's video, referenced the VDR. Now, we did not have access to this press conference before making last night's video. So what we're going to do today is, in this video, we're going to run a section of that press conference of a few minutes. It's a long press conference. And we're going to give additional information. We're going to pause the video and give additional information to explain how the report from Bloomberg omitted an important point made by the NTSB. Now, this means that something I said in last night's video was incorrect, and we'll address that right now. This new information actually clears up the speculation that the VDR may have been deliberately switched off or that data is mysteriously missing. Now, before we roll the tape, we've got a couple of things from the press conference to clear up some erroneous reporting from various different places. Last night, we said there was a discrepancy in how many crew were on board. The management company gave a different number, but the NTSB said there were 21 crew members on board, plus 2 pilots, and they said it was a total of 23 souls on board at the time of the accident. Some information about the VDR. The regulations say, I've seen some comments that people were saying that the VDR can delete data after 12 hours and it just rolls after 12 hours. That's incorrect. Regulations say the VDR must record 30 days of data. At the time of this press conference, the NTSB had access to 6 hours from midnight until 6 a.m., which covers the accident. But they said they would have in due course the full 30 days. So they just didn't have it before this press conference started. Also, the VDR records the following data: audio, recordings from VHF radios, limited sensor data, ship speed, RPM, heading, rudder angle, plus some alarm information. So we'll play the NTSB press conference and we'll stop to talk about the important points. Now, in the press conference, it starts with the NTSB chair, Jennifer Hammondy, and the other person speaking is Marcel Muse. He's the other representative from the NTSB talking at the press conference. And as they say at the beginning of this press conference, all the information is preliminary and subject to final validation. In other words, it can change in the course of the investigation. So let's roll the video.
The times expressed below, as recorded by the VDR and converted to local Eastern Daylight Time. All information is preliminary and subject to final validation. By 1:07, the ship had entered the channel, and by 1:24, the ship was underway on a true heading of approximately 141 in the Fort McHenry Channel at a speed of over ground of approximately 8 knots or 9.2 miles per hour. At 01:24 and 59 seconds, numerous audible alarms were recorded on the ship's bridge audio. About the same time, VDR sensor data ceased recording.
Okay, so we'll pause here. And if we look at the live stream footage, that basically lines up with the footage of the first blackout, the timing that he gives out in that press conference. Now, please note that this is critical. He says the VDR sensor data stops recording, right? Okay, back to the video.
However, the VDR audio continued to record using the redundant power source.
Okay, so we'll stop again. The VDR audio continues recording. Now, this is where the reporter in the Bloomberg article that we referenced last night gets it wrong. He misunderstood what he was hearing, as he probably has no technical background of shipping. So what does that mean? And now, once you hear this, you won't be able to unhear it, so to speak. Now, the VDR continued recording audio data, but stopped recording sensor data. Why? Well, it stopped recording sensor data because there was no sensor data to record. They were in a blackout. The equipment on the bridge that sends data to the VDR stopped functioning at this point, or there was some part of the integrated bridge that stopped working when there was a blackout, which stopped the data from going to the VDR. But the VDR continued to record, as he says, due to a redundant power source. Now, this is the personal UPS, or uninterruptible power supply, that I was talking about in last night's video. This is the VDR's last source of backup power if everything else fails, which apparently in this instance it did. Now, it should be noted at this point that the VDR is a single unit. It's not separated. All the data is coming to one unit, so it's not possible to simply switch off the data but continue with the audio. So this proves the VDR was never switched off and continued recording the entire time. All right, so we'll go back to the video.
At around 01:26 and 2 seconds, the VDR resumed recording sensor data, and during this time there were steering commands and rudder orders recorded on the audio.
So we'll pause again. So the sensor data returns as the power is restored to the vessel, and the steering commands and rudder orders that he mentions are from the pilot giving audible commands to the crew. It's been recorded on the ship's audio. Again, if we go back to the video, we see that the power comes back on around that same time, right? So it all seems to line up. Now, so data once again starts being fed to the VDR, which has remained on the entire time.
At around 01:26 and 39 seconds, the ship's pilot made a general VHF radio call for tugs in the vicinity to assist. About this time, the Pilot Association dispatcher phoned the MDTA duty officer regarding the blackout. Around 01:27 and 4 seconds, the pilot ordered the Dali to drop the port anchor and ordered additional steering commands. Around 1:27 and 25 seconds, the pilot issued a radio call over the VHF radio, reporting that the Dali had lost all power and was approaching the bridge.
Okay, we'll pause again. This lines up with the video pretty much in terms of times. This is after the second blackout occurred. Again, in last night's video, the report we quoted from Bloomberg said the pilot made a call on HF. It's a small point, which I said was unusual because he should have been using VHF. Well, it would appear the reporter misheard that, as he clearly says the pilot called on VHF. This is why I always say that it's so vital that you always go to the source and not listen to others, because even if they don't intend to mislead you, they can mislead you if they give you the wrong information. Okay, back to the video.
Around 01:29, the ship's speed over ground was recorded at just under 7 knots, or 8 miles per hour. From this moment until approximately 1:29 and 33 seconds, the VDR audio recorded sounds consistent with the collision of the bridge. Additionally, around this time, MDTA dash cameras show the bridge lights extinguishing. Additional analysis of the VDR audio and comparison with other time sources will be needed to determine the exact time of contact between the Dali and the bridge. At 1:29 and 39 seconds, the pilot reported the bridge down over the VHF radio to the Coast Guard.
Okay, so I hope that clears up the misreporting in the press, and now you understand what was happening based on the information we've received from the NTSB, which is, of course, is based on the data that they've recovered from the VDR, plus AIS data, plus the video data. All right, so I'll move on to another thing that came up in the comments of last night's video. I talked about in last night's video, I said that the pilot is when he's on the bridge, he's in command over the captain. Quite a number of people disagreed with this. So I want to explain. Everything's not so black and white, right? Now, the captain is always ultimately responsible for his or her vessel. When the pilot is on board, they're working together to ensure the safe passage through the area for which the pilot is required to be on board, right? The pilot gives commands to the bridge crew, the navigational bridge crew on the ship, and they obey. Now, if the pilot gave a command that the captain deemed dangerous, of course, he could possibly say to the crew to not obey that command. Most likely scenario would be that the pilot and captain will have a conversation until they see things the same way. Unless this happens, it's effectively the pilot's bridge. Now, in my 20 plus years of experience at sea, I've seen some pilotages where the captain continues to give instructions to the helm and the pilot just stands and observes. This is usually when the pilot knows the captain frequents the area often and the captain is competent in that area. Now, however, if the pilot sees a mistake, he will offer a correction. Other pilots, they'll call the shots whilst on the bridge. So you can see, yes, the captain is still in charge, but the pilot is given commands. I'll give you an example, give you a metaphor. Driving on the motorway, highway, a cop pulls in front and tells you to follow him into a lay-by. So who's in charge? You still have control of your car, but you must follow the cop, right? Now, if the cop tries to guide you into the road of an oncoming truck, then of course you can stop and you should stop, but the cop is in control. So let's go back to the transcript of the press conference. 126:39, the ship's pilot made a general call for tugs in the area to assist. 127:04, the pilot ordered the Dali to drop the port anchor and ordered additional steering commands. 127:25, the pilot issued a radio call over the VHF, reporting that Dali had lost all power and was approaching the bridge. So you tell me who was in command on this bridge. So this is one of the reasons that we have pilots, because their local knowledge will expedite things in an emergency, right? He knows exactly which radio frequency to be on. He knows who to call. He knows the quickest things. He knows the best way to navigate that passage that he's in. Unfortunately here, because of the power loss, they didn't have the ability to avoid the impact with the bridge. All right, if you want to go to the source and watch the full press conference, I'll put a link in the description. It's on the NTSB website. So, all right, guys, thanks very much for watching. I hope this has helped you understand things more. And yeah, I hope it helps to get rid of a lot of these nonsensical conspiracy theories that are out there currently. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch up with you soon. Bye-bye.
We're continuing to follow the latest on the Baltimore bridge collapse. Today, crews started clearing thousands of tons of debris from the river. Tonight, we're hearing from one of the last drivers who made it across the bridge. Aaron Gilchrist has the story.
Tonight, cleanup of the collapsed Key Bridge finally underway. Highly trained salvage teams are using gas-powered cutters to chop the giant sections of steel into smaller pieces. A crane on top of a barge will then hoist and remove those pieces. The goal, to open up a temporary channel to get more vessels to the wreckage site. Do you have any sort of timeline as to when you may be able to open that temporary channel?
It's still going to take a little bit of time to first ensure that these initial pull that we're taking of the wreckage, that it does not have any secondary consequences.
Leaders on the ground say moving what's left of the 1.5 mile long bridge, the cargo ship beneath it, and the debris on the riverbed will be a painstaking, lengthy process. Nearly 400 people are working to get the Patapsco River back open after Tuesday's catastrophic crash. Maker Larry DeSantis was leaving one job on his way to another, taking the Key Bridge as he's done every day for 15 years.
If I had been 1 minute later, I probably wouldn't be here.
DeSantis believes his was one of the last cars to cross the bridge just before 1:30 in the morning.
I told my daughter I'm like in a little fog. It's just like, it's very scary.
Meanwhile, so many people wait. Families wait for answers about their loved ones, the 4 men whose bodies haven't been recovered.
Right now, the conditions make it unsafe for rescue divers. But as soon as those conditions change, Colonel Butler has assured me that those rescue divers will be going right back in the water.
And I'll tell you, somebody who is probably thrilled to hear that one of the 2 people rescued has been released from shock trauma is Jesus Campos, and that explains why we haven't seen him around here. He kind of disappeared about an hour ago. I went to look for him to ask him some follow-up questions. He is the man that we've been speaking to today who works for Bronner Builders, the company that was contracted to have the work crew on the bridge today. He's been distraught. He said that it was a 7-member crew. The 1 member that was rescued, he said, was in critical condition at the hospital, the last he knew. And he said the families of the other 6 of his friends, co-workers, and he called them family members at this point, their families were just sitting at home, he said, waiting for the call. He is the one who gave us a lot of the details about this crew that was doing road work, pothole work, according to state officials. He said it's a job he's done before for the company. He believes their shift was 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., that they shut down parts of the roadway across the Key Bridge at 9 last night so that this work could take place, and that this crew of 7 was supposed to be, sorry, that's windy back here, was supposed to be on until 5 o'clock in the morning. He told us at the time of the collapse, they were on a 30-minute break, which is standard. It's how they operate. And that what they do on a break is they take their breaks in their cars. Pickup trucks, actually, he said there would have been 4 of them, and that his friends and co-workers would have been in their cars. Some eat something, drink a little bit of water or something. Some close their eyes. He said it's very hard, strenuous work. And he said Jesus and his other colleagues who were not working on this shift are just beside themselves. They know how dangerous and precarious it can feel to be that high up on that bridge that he said feels like it's moving up and down all the time. But then he said they just can't imagine what it was like to be on that bridge. So we did speak to him, and through an interpreter. He was very gracious. He was very emotional as well. But we want to share a little bit with you of what Jesus Campos told us today.
Me siento mal por lo que está sucediendo.
I am so bad. I feel so bad right now that this has happened. Mr. Campos told us 3 of the men were from Mexico and were related to each other. He said 2 were from Guatemala, the rest from Honduras and El Salvador. We asked him, what do you want people to know about your friends and about what happened?
No, pues eran buenas personas y somos buenas personas.
They were good people. They were good workers, he said. They were working so that they could send money home to their countries.
Sí, pues demasiado, pues porque tenemos familias que los esperan en casa.
It's too much to bear right now because all the families are waiting at home for the phone calls. And you can't help, or I couldn't help but make the connection between the crew members on this road crew who were working on the bridge and, according to the Apostleship of the Seas director, the 22 seafarers who were on board the container ship. All of them, according to the people who knew them and talked to them, were doing it for their families so that they could send money back home to have a better life. And Director Middleton of the Apostleship of the Sea said for the folks on the container ship, for those seamen, oftentimes that's the only way. They sign up for 8-9 month stints away from their families. That's the contract, and they do it because that's the way that they earn money for their families, so their families can have a better life. It's just very interesting that especially this bridge that's and this place that's about the port and working people is also the people that were directly involved and impacted by this are people who are just working. They're just working their jobs. So Mr. Campos said he's hoping and praying for the families and for his friends who remain unaccounted for. I will say, We have noticed a lot of equipment coming in and out. It could be a shift change, which happens. It's after 5 o'clock, but we have seen a couple of ambulances go in down to Hawkins Point in the last hour. Who knows if they just needed some people on standby, but that is something that we have seen. We've seen some people come out, some people go in, and that's one of the kinds of vehicles that we saw go in there tonight. So that's what's happening here right now at Hawkins Point as far as the public is being allowed to go, and we'll send it back to you.
Crews in Baltimore are beginning the long road to recovery days after the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. On Tuesday, a container ship that lost power hit the crossing, sending it crumbling into the water. Today, 3 cranes from the U.S. Navy arrived in Baltimore to start removing submerged portions of the bridge, and a 4th will arrive next week. Boats, tugs, and barges will also be on site to help clear the debris piece by piece. It's far from a simple task since the section of the bridge resting on the cargo ship weighs 9 million pounds.
So our team needs to cut that truss into sections in a safe, in a responsible, and in an efficient way before it can lift those pieces out of the water.
President Biden says he wants the federal government to cover the cost of rebuilding the bridge. He also plans to visit the collapse site next week. Well, the bridge.
We start with that complicated cleanup operation underway in Baltimore as crews begin removing tons of wreckage from what used to be the Francis Scott Key Bridge. After that, teams will need to remove thousands of tons of debris from the cargo ship that crashed into the bridge and then pull out the ship's remains from the shipping channel. Only then can officials begin searching for the bodies of the 4 remaining construction workers. President Biden says he will visit the wreckage sometime next week. Here's CBS News senior transportation reporter Chris Van Cleve.
The effort to clear away the wreckage of the Francis Scott Key Bridge and reopen the Port of Baltimore is getting a lift from the biggest floating crane on the East Coast. Now, in Baltimore Harbor, it will be able to pick up pieces of debris weighing up to 1,000 tons.
I want this done quickly. I want it done right, but this is going to be a long road.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
Our economy depends on the Port of Baltimore, and the Port of Baltimore depends on vessel traffic.
In the coming days, an armada of 7 floating cranes, 10 tugboats, 9 barges, 8 salvage vessels, and 5 Coast Guard ships will join the effort.
In order to get the Port of Baltimore back open, they have to clear a 700-foot wide chunk of this channel, which means all of this debris has to go, and there's even more on the bottom of the channel.
One of the priorities is removing the wreckage, preventing divers from recovering the bodies of the 4 construction workers still unaccounted for. Among them, father of 3 Jose Lopez, his wife Isabel Franco, speaking through an interpreter.
I feel bad. Only God knows how hard my heart aches. Maybe he was desperate, trying to escape.
New video from the NTSB takes us inside the crippled cargo ship Dolly, sitting frozen in the moment it collided with the bridge. Investigators have focused on gathering perishable evidence and interviewing the crew and boat pilots who were on board early Tuesday morning. While the data is still being analyzed, CBS News estimates when the more than 900-foot-long ship rammed into the bridge, it hit with at least the same force as the thrust generated by the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket.
And Chris joins us now. So just on the boat alone, there's around 4,000 tons of bridge that needs to be removed. Chris, how do they go about cleaning up all that destruction that's there behind you?
Well, the piece of truss that's resting on the ship, 3,000 to 4,000 tons worth of steel, they're going to have to cut that into pieces because even this giant crane they brought in can only lift about 1,000 tons at a time. So it's exacting work. And remember, what we can see is only part of the debris. A lot of it has sunk down some 50 feet into this completely almost midnight dark blackout water that they've got to go in and cut into pieces by hand. Divers will have to do that. So it is a painstaking process. And the Army Corps of Engineers told us that every time they remove a piece, it changes the math on removing the rest. So it really sounds like a complicated effort that is going to take time.
Yeah, a tremendous engineering problem. Chris, I'm also hoping you can talk to us about the effect that the collapse of the bridge has had, not only on the economy there, but as a nation as a whole.
Sure. So the Port of Baltimore is one of the nation's busiest. It is particularly busy for cars, coal, and sugar. Those things cannot move in or out right now. There are ships in the harbor that can't get out, and there are cargo ships and cruise ships that can't get in. So you have a significant disruption when you look at supply chain issues. Now, the ships will go to other ports and things will get where they're going eventually, but that's going to cause delays. And of course, the things that needed to get out of this port will either have to be trucked or trained somewhere else. Otherwise, they're going to be sitting here for an unknown period of time. There's also the economic impact of the 8,000 people who work at the port, whose jobs are in limbo. And there's a push by the governor and some Maryland state lawmakers to pass some kind of payroll protection measure so that they at least have income coming in while they can't work because the port is shut down.
All right. Chris Van Cleve in Sparrows Point, Maryland. Thank you.
I need one of you guys on the south side, one of you guys on the north side, hold all traffic on the Key Bridge. There's a ship approaching that just lost their steering. So until you get that under control, we gotta stop all traffic.
F4L, I'm en route to the south side.
Dispatch direction.
I'm holding traffic now. I was dragging, but we stopped prior to the bridge, so I'll have all outer loop traffic stopped.
10-4, is there a crew working on the bridge right now? Yeah, if we can stop traffic, just make sure no one's on the bridge right now. You might want to notify whoever the foreman is, see if we can get them off the bridge temporarily.
10-4, once the other unit gets here, I'll ride up on the bridge. I have all interloop traffic stopped at this time. Once you get here, I'll go grab the workers on the Key Bridge and then stop the outer loop. C-13 dispatch, the whole bridge just fell down. Start is whoever, everybody. The whole bridge just collapsed.
10-4, dispatch is direct.
That's correct.
Do we know if all traffic was stopped?
I can't get to the other side, sir. The bridge is down. We're going to have to get somebody on the other side, the Anne Arundel County MSP, to get up here and stop traffic coming northbound on the T Bridge. C-13, I'm holding all traffic northbound.
Have a live image of the destruction of the Key Bridge. We know that cleanup efforts are starting today. We know that cranes are being moved into position. We have a different angle, this one a little bit closer still. And and you can see the people walking. Gives you an idea of the scope, how big this cleanup process is going to be. This is a massive undertaking for these workers. So I am Austin Westfall. I'll be with you hosting for the next few hours here. We do want to continue our coverage of the Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. Take a look. This is a live image. The sun is setting right now, but I do want to give you a closer look. Look for scale. If you can make out some of the workers working in neon orange and neon green, they're very tiny compared to the massive destruction encompassing, surrounding around these people. It's quite the process, it's going to take quite some time. That's what officials say. This is some of the cranes. We're just seeing today for the first time the cranes that are being brought in to actually work on removing this debris from the ocean. Of course, 4 people still yet to be recovered from this disaster site. There will likely be a push for Congress to pay for part or all of a new Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. Senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram brings us this story.
There's an immediate demand to rebuild the bridge. The city of Baltimore, the East Coast, and the American economy demand it.
So this is not just going to impact Maryland. This is impacting the farmer in Kentucky. It's impacting the auto dealer in Michigan.
In 2007, the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis plunged into the Mississippi River, killing 13 people and injuring 145. Congress responded at breakneck speed.
H.R. 3311, a bill to authorize additional funds for emergency repairs and reconstruction of the interstate I-35 bridge located in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that collapsed on August 1st, 2007.
The House voted 421 to nothing just days after the collapse, greenlighting $250 million for a new bridge. The Senate okayed the bill unanimously.
I think everyone in this chamber and the country and the world is aware of the tragedy that befell our state.
The new bridge opened an astonishing 13 months after the collapse. Today, lawmakers hope they can replicate that speed to reconstruct the Baltimore Bridge. GOP Maryland Representative Andy Harris cited Minnesota, demanding the government sideline environmental and regulatory burdens to accelerate this rebuild. But we're in a different political climate today than 2007. Money for the bridge would be an extra appropriation. Congress struggled just to avoid a government shutdown. That means money for a new bridge could be a political fight. On Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
Chad, thank you for that report. Meanwhile, we're getting a new tweet in from the National Transportation Safety Board saying that the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse investigation, the displacement or weight of the container ship Dali at the time of departure was 112,000 metric tons. That's about 248 million pounds. It's tough to put into perspective just how big this undertaking will be for these. And again, I'm going to pull up this image. I'm going to remove the graphic from the bottom of your screen because I just want to point out, for scale purposes, you can see the workers and how small they are walking on the ground. It's almost tough to make them out in those neon green shirts that they're wearing. So we're talking about a massive bridge, obviously, a massive cargo ship, and a massive cleanup process. This image is live. We're watching this as they work. They have been working much of the afternoon. We've been watching as materials, these cranes have been brought to the disaster zone where we understand they will be working for quite some time. Obviously, time will tell exactly how long it takes to clean up this debris. Teams of engineers are starting the removal process today by cutting a section of the steel bridge. From there, They'll attach straps to lift the section onto a barge in order to be floated away. Here's what we know about their resources today. There are 7 floating cranes, including one capable of lifting 1,000 tons. There are also 10 tugboats. There's 9 barges, 8 salvage vessels, and 5 Coast Guard boats. The governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, says this first step is incredibly complicated and will set the tone for how the rest of the process goes. Now, looking ahead, the first goal is to get the smaller ship channel open. So, what does that mean? Tugboats, smaller vessels will be allowed to move more freely in this area. That's at least the immediate goal here. They also need to stabilize the site so that divers can continue recovery efforts for the 4 workers that are still missing, presumed to be dead. 2 bodies of construction workers have been recovered. They were recovered shortly after the collapse. The crew of the cargo ship involved are still on board and making sure that the boat is running and those people are being interviewed as well by investigators, including the National Transportation Safety Board. The crew is safe, and there's no indication of environmental concerns from the ship at this time, according to officials. President Joe Biden has approved $60 million in immediate aid and promised the federal government would fully pay for the cost of rebuilding. The bridge came tumbling down early on Tuesday after a massive cargo freighter that had lost power plowed into the structure in Baltimore Harbor. As we mentioned, 2 bodies have been recovered, 4 others are still missing. Maryland Governor Wes Moore had requested that $60 million earlier on Friday, and within hours, the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration approved the request to fund emergency work.